This is Brittany with Limberlost, and you're watching CMS TV.
It is Chris Akin Presents. I, of course, am Chris Akin, and today on the show, we get a legend talking about probably the most anticipated tour of 2026. The 1984 to Headless tour starts on September 10th in California, ends on Halloween in California, and here to talk to me, I'm assuming from California, it is the one and only Blackie Lawless. Blackie, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you, man. Before we even talk about the tour, I just have to start by saying we didn't get WASP for a very long time here in the States. There was that big long window where you were doing Europe and you really weren't playing here much. And now you're right back on top of the last touring cycle with yet another tour here in the States. So let me ask simply, what changed? Is there renewed interest? Or is there renewed interest from you to play the States? I mean, what changed that you brought it back to the States?
You know, I think things go in cycles sometimes, because any band will go anywhere if there are promoters that will bring them. And I think a lot of it was just perception from the promoter's perspective. It was not from the fans. Fan base was always there.
Sure.
But getting promoters to understand that a lot of times, you know, they can be tone deaf at times, and until they're shown, then they don't believe, you know, but in this case, seeing is literally believing.
Right, certainly. And they're going to be seeing a lot of it here with the 1984 to Headless tour. For people that don't know, that's obviously covering the hottest period, I would say, of WASP as far as commercial appeal, as well as the albums that most people lean to. Most people, if you ask them what's your favorite WASP record, they say Debut, Last Command, Headless Children. I mean, that's really where people lay in with WASP. For you, Blackie, as you decided to do this, what was the appeal to you to doing this instead of kind of doing the normal thing where you cover the entire catalog?
Well, if you look at any band, and it's not just us, if you think of all the bands that you like, the first 5 years is where they make their bones.
Sure.
And we're no different, you know. So for any band that's had success, those first 5 years are always going to be the records that people remember the most. That's not to say that they can't make records after that period that are good, because, you know, a lot of times bands will go on to have lengthy careers. And usually if they're going to make it 20, 30 years, you have to have more than just those 5 years. But I would say that if you think back to any band that you really like, those first 5 years are always going to be the ones where they're cemented into people's thought process.
Sure. Do you think it's only because it's the first that they heard of you? Because, like, and I'll be very specific in what I'm trying to ask you here. I think personally, in your career, the best material started at the Headless Children and went on from there. Because, not that I didn't like the early stuff. I mean, Last Command is a great record. I did one of my all-time favorite records. But I don't think you had found yourself yet. I think you were being a little more shocking than cerebral, where I think from Headless on, you really dug into your lyrics and got more cerebral. And I personally think you wrote better music. What was it for you? Do you feel that way? Or do you still look at the first two records, especially, and say, yeah, you know, that was very important. That's what people should be drawn to.
Well, I would say the majority of the fan base would agree with you, because there's a misconception that the first album that we did, or the debut album, was the best-selling record. And although it did do well, Headless has been the best-selling record we've ever had. So, you know, I mean, that record flew out of the box. It went gold in the first week.
Right.
You know, so I think it was one of those where you start to see again, back to that first 5 year cycle that we're talking about, you see bands start to mature because they've been around the world 2 or 3 times at that point. They've seen everything that they would ever want to see. They've played, where they wanted to play. They've met their heroes. All those experiences start adding up, and it becomes a collective when they really start to go back to put it on the drawing board again, to however they're going to visualize wherever their career is going to go from there. And so I think it's a combination of all the collective experiences they've had, because when the first, like, and I'm going back to this first 5 years again, and I can't really overstate it, because it is true. Because you do a record and a tour and a record and a tour and a record and a tour, when you get done with those cycles, you don't really know who you are, because you've toured so much. You don't have time to get acquainted with yourself until you take a break. And we did, after the third album, after the Circus record, we took about a year to make Headless. And when I started really getting into the writing process, I took about 6 months off and didn't do anything. And when I came back to writing again, it was like I was a brand new person. I didn't know who I was anymore. And again, you literally have to get reacquainted with yourself. And when you do that, you find that you've changed and you think in different ways, because again, the collective experiences that you've had over those touring cycles and things like that, you really do find that you are a different person. So if you're writing records, and if, it's always been said that, if writers write from truth, which they should, and I mean, that's always going to be their best work. If you're going to write from a perspective of truth, then it's going to reflect in your work. And I certainly think it did in these cases.
Sure. When you look back at your catalog, especially where you have changed as a man, you changed your vision of life and your vision of the world. How do you feel when you see those first 3 records that really don't, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they really don't represent who you are now and who you became as a person?
Well, think of it like, a wardrobe, maybe. Maybe this is a poor analogy, but, what might have fit you at one point in your life may not fit later on.
Mm-hmm.
And then you find that it's not like you're buying clothes off the rack, so to speak. You're specifically tailoring everything that you might wear to fit you the best that it can. Well, music is the same way. When you're writing like that, you're literally tailoring it. If you're writing from a perspective of truth and to reflect who you are, then that's what you're going to do. Because when we made our first record, a really interesting thing happened. And, it was born out of tragedy, but we were making the first record, and the engineer that we were working with, he was the kind of guy that, he was always kind of bubbly, and, he always had some crap going on. He was a funny guy. And I came in the studio, it was one Sunday, and I was the first one there, except for him. And he wasn't saying anything. And after about an hour, I said to him, "Hey, man, what gives?" I said, "Is something wrong?" And he said, "I got a phone call this morning. I said, I found out last night Marvin Gaye was murdered."
Mm.
And I did not know that he had made 2 records with Marvin.
Okay.
And so I just let him talk for a while. And he said, over that time, he says, I learned something really important from Marvin. He said, you make records that reflect who you are at that moment in your career. You don't worry about what's on the charts. You don't worry about what's hot at the time, whatever the flavor of the month might be, any of that. You make the records that reflect who you are at that moment. Now, when we were making that first record, that's exactly what I was doing, but I didn't know it.
Okay.
I was just writing from whatever my gut instinct was. So I was doing that unbeknownst to even myself. But over the period of, or the course of my career, I ingrained that. It was like I took a branding iron, seared it into my forehead. I never let that thought go away, because that really, if again, we're going to write from a perspective of truth, that's how you do it. You got to write from that point of view of who are you at this point in time, not who you were 5 years ago, or again, whatever you think is hot on the charts. Who are you now? And that's going to be the most truthful form of writing.
Sure.
Hey, you. Why are you watching this with commercials? Go commercial-free and unlock exclusive content. Become a VIP today on Locals, Substack, or Rumble Premium. Stop waiting.
When you look back at your entire base of work, do you have records in your head that you wish the audience would have gravitated to more? Like, and I'll tell you, for me personally, if people ask me what's my favorite WASP record, or they ask me to share them a record, I always go to Unholy Terror every time, because I just think that is such a good representation of everything that you became as an artist. What is it for you, if there is one for you, that maybe people didn't get from the first 5 years, but should have gotten to understand who Blackie Lawless and WASP truly is?
I don't know if I could really answer that, because I look at the entire body of work like a book.
Okay.
And each record's a chapter, and you're not finished until you're finished. So from that point of view, I don't know if I could actually put my finger on it, because there's moments, and probably each one of them, that I could point at to, for one reason or another, to tell you, that I either liked some of it or I didn't. And so, like I said, to single any one of them out, I don't know if I could do that.
Sure.
At least not at this point.
Makes sense. Well, Blackie, let's talk about the tour itself, because that's what people are going to be listening to this to find out about. Start with a statement that you mentioned in the press that I wanted to maybe get you to expand upon, and that was that you're going to visually make the album covers kind of come alive on the stage. What does that mean, and how do you enact that to happen?
Well, there's elements, if you look at those album covers, there's elements on those things that we literally, especially with the Headless Children part, there's a lot of caricatures on the front of that record. And it wouldn't even do me any good to try to explain it to you. But there are elements of those album covers, of those people that are on that album, that are literally going to come alive during the show.
Okay.
And there's one thing in particular that we're going to do. I'd made the joke about killing Hitler, and somebody said, "Can we do that?" And I said, "Why not?"
All right.
So, I can't think of a person that you'd want to dig up and kill them over and over again. So, like I said, my feelings are, why not?
Right on. Well, Blackie, obviously a lot of this material is not the range that you naturally sing in these days. It was superhuman at the time when you were in your 20s doing those super high notes. How do you adjust for that on the tour? Do you tune down, or do you work with some tracks in the back to kind of bolster it? I mean, how will you be attacking the vocal on this?
I've been blessed, bud. I still sing the songs in the same key they were, and the good Lord put a flamethrower in my throat when I was born. So I've been really, really blessed when it comes to that. So I still, and it's funny too, because I kind of take it for granted, because I live with it, but when people hear it, they go, "Wow, he still sounds the same." It's like, and from my point of view, I'm thinking, well, yeah, why shouldn't I? But I do understand that people do change, and some people, aren't that fortunate. I remember it must have been 15 years ago. I went to see B.B. King,
okay,
and I was sitting in the second row. I was literally, 10 feet away from him.
okay.
And I could hear him singing. He was sitting in a chair. He says, "I got to sit down. I'm 81 years old." He's sitting in a chair, but I could hear him singing acoustically. And where I was sitting, I could hear him acoustically louder than what was coming out of the PA on the sides.
Right.
And he was roaring like a lion. And I thought, you know what? That's what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be this guy.
Right on.
And that's really what I've concentrated on. So like I said, I think a lot of it is is what you're born with, and if somebody has a situation where they don't sound as good later in their life as they did when they were younger, hey, maybe next time around get better parents.
Right. Is that the stop point for you if the voice went? And I don't want to name, obviously any of your contemporaries, but we all know who they are that are out there, and they're not able to produce it at a high level anymore, but they still perform. Is that where you would say, like, if all of a sudden your voice just went for whatever reason,
that would be real easy for me to say yes, but
okay?
from a fan's perspective, that wouldn't be fair to say that, because you got to remember, when people are going to shows a lot of times, they're wanting to recall a piece of their lives at a certain point, and they're there triggering memories from their past. And so who am I to say that it's not fair, for someone to go out and try to rekindle those memories for them? So like I said, for me to try to compare myself to anybody else, I don't think that would be fair, because like I said, I've been really, really fortunate. But I would really leave that up to the fan base, to make those decisions, because like I said, for anybody that could continue to perform at a high level, it would be easy for them to pass judgment on somebody else. But like I said, I'll leave that to the fans.
Right on. Well, Blackie, without giving too much of it away, tell us about the VIP museum experience.
Well, that was something that we started about 5 years ago, and we had never done meet and greets before.
Mm-hmm.
And, I always felt kind of strange about the idea of, if you were going to charge an admission for something like that. We looked at it and we said, well, what are other bands doing? We didn't know anything about it. I mean, we were literally green.
Okay.
And there was no place to go to ask, so we started looking at what other bands are doing. And quite honestly, I didn't feel comfortable with what I saw other artists doing. And again, I'm not putting anybody down for anything they do, but we saw that they were doing a photograph and a couple of signatures. And I thought, if I was going to meet somebody that I really was genuinely interested in, I would want to hear what they have to say. And so what we did is we put this literal rolling museum together, and it's excerpts from throughout the history of the band. And it's a pretty cool little ensemble when you see it laid out. It's about 30 feet across, and it's in rolling tour cases and things like that. And we open it up, and it's got all these things inside of it, that are mementos, like gold records and album covers and magazine covers, and just, the cod piece from the Animal single and things like that. I mean, things you just wouldn't see any day or every day. But the thing that has been the best for me is when we do the meet and greets, we do it in a way where we kind of assembly line it, where we do the photos and the signatures first, but then we get into the meat of it, which is really what I prefer, which is we have a Q&A, and it usually lasts about an hour, where everyone gets to ask a question, sometimes multiple questions. And that's the part I like the most, because I found it became like little mini market surveys. Because when someone comes up to you on the street and they see you out of the blue, it's usually a chaotic situation. Right. And they're nervous and they can't think straight. And it's just, they don't really have the ability to verbalize what it is they want to say. But when they know they're coming to a meet and greet or a VIP experience like this, they have time to think about the questions they want to say or ask. And for me, that becomes very conversational, kind of like what we're doing right now. And there's a back and forth and a give and take. And like I said, it's a little mini market survey from me. And I get to hear them in a controlled situation, unlike the chaos that would be on the streets. And I'm learning maybe more from them than they are from me at that point, because, like I said, I've never had the ability to speak to the fan base like we do now when we do this. And it's been really, really interesting for me to hear what they have to say. And I wish I would have started doing it years ago.
Sure.
But better late than never, I guess, right?
Well, after 5 years now of doing it, how is the fan base different, their thought process from what you envisioned before you started doing it?
Well, I was suspect that the thing that brought them together was the lyrics, but I wasn't really sure. But that's the one big confirmation that has come out of all of this, that it's the lyrics of these songs that really bring them all. That's what knits it all together. And it makes sense to me, because when you hear them say something like, this song really changed the way I thought, or this song changed my life, or this song did whatever, and I'm listening to them when they're talking, and it's like, a lot of times there's some really emotional stories come out of these folks, because it also serves as a bit of a confessional for both them and me. So like I said, the give and take that goes on there, it's pretty priceless. It's been one of the greatest experiences of my life, and I mean that sincerely.
Sure. Now let me ask you one philosophical thing before we wrap up, Blackie. Anybody that knows your history knows the whole PMRC and how you stood up and whatnot. And when I look today, 2026, I look at it, I feel like the work that you did and Dee Snider did and several people did to fight for free speech, I almost feel like the government took that and has used corporate entities to kind of subvert that now, because now the government doesn't have to be accountable for censorship. They just say, well, it's social media, we can't control a private company, and they almost endorse censorship these days, where before they had to answer for it. How do you feel about that? And do you feel like the work that you did then, A, is still important today, or B, needs somebody to do it today, to stand up and say, we can't have this on Twitter, we can't have this on Facebook, or whatever?
That's a really interesting perspective of what you're introducing there, because a lot of times any government will use the private sector to create whatever it is that they're trying to suppress. And it certainly was the case with what we had done before. But my feelings are this: I don't care what anybody says, other than standing up and saying, I want to blow Joe Blow's brains out. You should have the right to sit up and say whatever it is that you want, because I have enough faith in my fellow man to believe that, it's like the old analogy: if you take 2 glasses of water and you put ink in one of the glasses of water, and then you give the people the chance to choose which one they want, they're going to take the pure glass every time.
Right.
And I have enough faith in people to believe that if they're given the opportunity to hear truth, that they will accept the truth over the lie any day. And if you put 10 people together and you give them a little bit of information to source out wherever it is that truth may be, they're going to find it. So I'm not worried about, and I said all that to say that I'm not worried that if someone's getting bad information, that they're going to run with it. Because if you've got enough intelligent people there, and I underline the intelligent part, they're going to know where the truth is going. My dad told me a long time ago when I was a kid, he says, you want to know what's going on? He says, don't ask one person, ask 4 or 5 people what's going on. You'll start to get a direction of where something is going. And that'll give you an idea of where the truth really is. So when it comes to that, I would, if there's one thing that I've always said about, if I had to make one statement about what my career is, or what my career has stood for, it would be the idea of think for yourself. That has been what my entire career has been about. Think for yourself. That's what all these lyrics I've written about over the years are all about. Don't let someone tell you how to think. Don't become part of the robotic, masses out there that are just literally marching into rhythm. Headless Children was about that. I wrote another song years later called Charisma. I got them all marching to the rhythm. Believe in me, yeah, the new. It's like, think for yourself, so that's really, really important.
Sure.
The ultimate hub for metal talk is classicmetalshow.locals.com. Get free episodes, social commentary, and VIP exclusive content. It's our online home. That's classicmetalshow.locals.com.
In a perfect world, when Blackie Lawless has retired, you're sitting in a rocking chair on your porch.
Well, that ain't gonna happen. But
well, if it was to happen, when you're 95, I'll put it that way. When you're 95 years old.
What they got to do with anything?
Good point. How would you, in your heart of hearts, want to be remembered? As
just for exactly what I just said there. He preached literally to people to think for yourself, and to think for yourself, you got to do your own homework.
Sure.
So do that. And if you do that, then my message will have been successful.
And if they never brought up the shock rock era of your career, you'd be okay with that?
Interesting question. I fall back to the book analogy that it's been one chapter after another. So I don't think that you would be able to cherry pick it.
Right.
But then again, all art is subjective. And if you got 10 people, and they've got the 10 different opinions. But with art, there is no wrong. They are all 10 going to be correct. So again, I would defer to the fan base on that.
Right on. Well, I would defer to the fan base to go and buy your tickets for the 1984 to Headless tour. It's going to be great. One more time, September 10th. It starts in California, October 31st. It ends in Anaheim, California. Blackie's going to be there rocking your asses off, as only WASP has been known to do for decades at this point. So, Blackie, what am I missing that you want people to know other than to get out there and pre-buy their tickets?
Well, I'm excited about this bill because we played with KK's band.
Sure.
And I'm here to tell you, folks, if you want to hear them songs done right, these boys are playing those songs, and they sound phenomenal. And Ripper, as a singer, I got my work cut out for me, buddy, going toe-to-toe with him every night. So if you want to see a bill, when it was proposed to me, what I thought, the first thing that came to my head was, if I was in the fan base, I would want to go see this. And that's the reason that when I came up with the tagline and the statement that I made, where do I get my ticket? That's the reason I said that. Because so often anymore, we don't see great packages anymore like we used to. And I think that's one thing that's missing from what we do now. And this is a terrific package, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's going to be a great tour. I cannot wait till the Cleveland stop. It's going to be fantastic. One more time, it is WASP 1984 to Headless tour, September 10th to October 31st. And Blackie, this is always fun, man. Thanks for joining me once again.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you taking the time, buddy.
Your daily metal fix is on Rumble. Watch the Classic Metal Show episodes free or go commercial free with a premium subscription. Find your Classic Metal Show now at rumble.com/c/CMS, rumble.com/c/CMS.